Hi everybody, this is an introduction to the A-level AQA unit on the Tudors, which is 70421C. I'm going to look at the very basics of the unit and how the exam works today. This will be part of a series which looks at all the different themes and concepts. Right, so the monarchs. So over the 2 years study, you will look at Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. So some of you may have some background knowledge on Elizabeth from a GCSE unit. You may well have covered some of the Tudors at earlier points, either earlier in secondary school or perhaps even at primary school. Elizabeth and Henry VIII are the two kind of standouts, the most well-known of the Tudors. Henry VII is a particular favourite of mine. He's a really kind of key figure at a turning point in British history in between the medieval and the early modern period. Edward's really interesting, though only on the throne for a very short period of time. One of the particular interest of that is this concept of a 9-year-old inheriting the throne and then ruling as a kind of an early teen as well. And quite how much power and control he had is debatable. Now, the time period with Edward and his elder sister Mary in charge, Mary I, sometimes referred to as Bloody Mary, who was Catholic and is most known for persecution of the Protestants in England. Now that time period too is often referred to as the mid-Tudor crisis, what you've got then is these minor Tudors, the small Tudors, kind of in between our great Tudors, in particular Henry VIII and Elizabeth. They're all really interesting characters, and there's lots of other really interesting characters alongside, like Mary Queen of Scots and Robert Dudley and the Seymour brothers. So there's loads and loads of really good stuff in it. And it gives us a real good grounding on understanding how England has developed how it has. There's lots of different themes to pick out of it. Some really significant moments in UK history, for example, the Spanish Armada, the Reformation, and the change from a Catholic church to the Anglican church. So lots of really interesting stuff. It's a really great unit, and I'm going to talk to you next about the key questions. So with all the Unit 1s, they start with this basis of key questions. So the ones on the Tudor unit is how effectively did the Tudors restore and develop the powers of the monarchy? So this changes from Henry VII, who has to re-establish the power of the monarchy following the War of the Roses, where the power of the monarch has really diminished, to Henry VIII, who massively expands it with the taking over of the church. Then we've got Edward, who's got the problem with the power of the monarchy whilst being a minor, and then you've got Mary and Elizabeth, who they got the power of the monarch, but in these times, which aren't quite as enlightened as today, we've got female rulers and a society that is struggling with that concept. So we look at how well England was governed. So you look at all the different elements of government, the council, the parliaments, and the monarch, who essentially is central to all of it. And we'll look at how good a job they do of running the country. You look at how they interact with foreign powers. So I've already mentioned the Armada, so you'd look at that under Elizabeth. You look at the deteriorating relationship with Spain through Elizabeth. In Henry VIII, you look at things like the Treaty of London, where he's trying to become central to the powers of Europe. You'll see him fighting the French, and then sat in a field of cloth of gold with and trying to look as important as he possibly can. We then see it's a really interesting bit of history where we see the changing in society. This obviously is a lot more gradual. The Tudors, people in Tudor times, we talked about this huge population exploding and massive kind of population growth. When you look at it from a modern point of view, you start to wonder what they're talking about, because the population growth they're talking about would seem very small beans compared to the modern day. But there are some fairly major changes in society. There's a growth of urbanisation, and there is development, particularly of a new class in terms of the gentry, and also in terms of changes in the countryside and the work that people are doing with things like enclosure. We see massive changes in religion, particularly under Henry VIII. with the move towards a non-Catholic church. Those developments of Protestant ideas really develop even further through the reigns of Edward and Elizabeth, and we see the kind of the fight back of the Catholic Church under Mary, and the religious ideas and things like humanism, which starts developing in the time of Henry VII, are really important and play a really important role in shaping England as it goes forward. And the other bit that we look at is key individuals. So not only the monarchs, but also key figures as well. One of the main ones named on the spec is Mary, Queen of Scots. But you'll see Robert Dudley, Edward Seymour, and various other kind of key figures, William Cecil, who figure in the reigns of the different monarchs. Two particular favourites of mine are Wolsey and Cromwell in the reign of Henry VIII. Right. So that's what you would learn will be based on that. And when I do my future videos, then what I will do is I'll take a monarch from the previous part of the video, and I'll take one of these key questions. And so I would, for example, do Henry VII and restoring and developing the power of the monarchy. And in another video, I will do Henry VIII and relations with foreign powers, and so on. So then really that should then set you up in terms of answering any of the questions. So if we look at the exam paper, section A is a 30-mark question. It's compulsory, there's no avoiding it, and you will get 3 extracts written by 3 different historians. The question will cover at least 20 years and should link to one of the key questions on the previous bit of the video. What you'll then need to do with each individual extract is you'll need to explain what its overall argument is, and then the sub-arguments that make that up. So essentially you're picking out what the historian is arguing. Do not expect there to be loads of factual detail in there. That will have been stripped out in terms of the condensing of the extract to put it on the exam. So what you then need to do is you need to then test that argument, having explained it and put it in your own words and say what they're arguing, is you then will pitch that against your knowledge. So is it convincing? That's always the question. So you go, well, they're arguing this, but this happened, so that's not very convincing. But they argue this, and actually this fully matches with the following events, and this and that and the other, and so you'll back it up and give it the flesh. And so right, and this one is convincing. One of the things to be careful with is it's likely that at least 2 of the extracts will be quite strongly conflicting in terms of what they're arguing. So if extract A argues Y and extract B argues Z, then you can't say, well, I agree with both Y and Z, if Y and Z are complete opposites to each other. So be careful in terms of making sure you're being consistent in your argument, and also try and give a bit of balance on each one, so it will not be all completely convincing or all unconvincing. There'll be a little bit of balance in there, but equally, as I always say to my students, don't sit on the fence, because sitting on fences is painful. So you need to be sure that you ultimately decide that an extract is convincing or it isn't overall, even though there might well be some bits of it that are less convincing or some bits of it that are convincing, whilst the overall picture is slightly different. Right, the second section is more straightforward. Essentially, there will be 3 essays. You will do 2 of them. I will be playing this video over and over again to some of my students, possibly even after the exam, when they come out saying, I really enjoyed that 1 essay I did, or was I really supposed to do all 3 in that short period of time? So no, you do 2 of the 3. The questions should cover at least 20 years again, and they should come out of one of the key questions, one of those key themes we've looked at. The period doesn't have to just be 20 years, it could be much longer. And for example, you might well get a question that covers the whole of Elizabeth's reign, going from 58 all the way through to 1603. You should try and cover the entire time period of the question, otherwise you run the risk of being penalised for doing a partial answer. And also remember that the judgment, the argument, is really, really important. You will get more marks, or at least as many marks for that element of your essay as you will do for recall of factual detail. So make sure when you're answering these, you don't just tell the story of Henry VII and the power of the monarchy, or Henry VIII and foreign policy. You need to be arguing, making judgments, balancing different views across, and really having that central view that you're going to try and convince the person reading your work is right. And that is where the top levels will come in. Right, Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, to comment, to subscribe, and keep an eye out for further videos on Tudor England. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you again for watching.